Good morning. Before we get started, I want to make sure you're at the right session. This is the IG session on internal and external threats facing your institutions. This is not the open forum. Some of those excellent, tough questions I heard the last 2 days, I'm hoping we don't get. But in all seriousness, just to echo some of the things I've heard earlier, is that it's nice to attend that forum because I get to hear from you all and hear your concerns and hear some of the programmatic issues, challenges you're having, which helps us understand how we need to be looking at the programs ourselves. So I'll get started. My name is Aaron Jordan. I'm the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations. I am joined by a very talented group. Adam Shanling, he's our Special Agent in charge of our Western region. Christopher Hodge is our Assistant Special Agent in charge of our Western region, and Nicole Eisenhoff, which is one of our investigative analysts, and she's actually the brains of our operation. We're here to talk about what you see there. We will take questions at the end, and hopefully some great questions. We have some tokens to incentivize some tough questions if you have them, but we are here to hopefully give you a better understanding of what we do and how we work with your institutions. With that, we'll get started. There we go. We have some technical difficulties here. That's okay. Well, yeah, we can maybe play it at the end. All right. Tell you what, we wanted to give you some sense of the kinds of cases we work, the hundreds of cases we work. This was one that involved a fraud ring out in the Denver area. We get plenty of media attention, which then brings even further attention to the kind of work we do. And we wanted to give you some sense of that in that video. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christopher Hodge.
Good morning, everybody. So what you missed there, hopefully you'll have an opportunity to see the clip at the end of the presentation. It's about a 2-minute clip, but it's a family, basically, that had a very bad morning. They woke up with us arresting them. They were brought into court, and they were walking out of the courtroom, and you saw an investigative reporter asking them a few questions. Essentially, this family decided, instead of using federal student aid for its designed purpose, they decided to use it for things like cosmetic surgery, gambling, exotic vacations, and things along those lines, including stealing people's identifiers and using their identities to obtain some of that money as well. With that said, what you see here is our agenda of what we're going to go over here today. Essentially, my job, we're going to tag team a little bit with my colleagues, my boss, actually Adam, and Nicole sitting over there. I'm going to start just giving you a general background about the OIG, and then Adam's actually going to go into a very interesting and often well-received portion about external and internal threats impacting Title IV funds and also emerging threats, with some actual case examples. And then we'll finish up with Nicole talking about some fraud indicators, prevention and detection advice for you all, and we'll wrap this up. So, and don't worry about, I know the slide's a little bit busy, so don't worry about straining your eyes. I'll hit the highlights and break it down for you. So, the U.S. Education Department Office of Inspector General is one of 72 statutory offices of Inspector General within the federal government. Our Inspector General is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. It's not a political position. It's an apolitical position. The Inspector General is appointed for his or her competency to do the job. And our mission, essentially, to sum it up here, is to combat fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption impacting U.S. education programs, operations, funds, and employees. As you see there, we primarily derive our authority from the Inspector General Act of 1978 as amended. That's where we derive our statutory full federal law enforcement authority. The IG Act also provides several provisions that strengthen our independence. We are an independent entity within the U.S. Education Department. For instance, we have dual reporting authority, independent dual reporting authority, up the executive branch to the agency head, the Secretary of Education, and also to Congress. In fact, we just completed our semi-annual report to Congress. That's something that we do twice a year. And in fact, it's becoming available sometime, I think either right now or this week. It will be available on our website. It's really easy to find. And in there you can find some of the important work that we do. It's not a comprehensive list of our work, but it's a good review of the types of things that we're doing across Title IV programs and also other programs that we have oversight of. Up there on the top right, given our audience here in Title IV, we always like to point out that we are FERPA exempt. The OIG is FERPA exempt. So for instance, if I or one of the agents that work for us contact you requesting some student records, we are FERPA exempt, so don't worry about violating that. In fact, we'll be happy to provide you a nice letterhead citing the specific CFRs that give us that FERPA exemption. And last, and I believe it's 34 CFR 668, the bottom right there, also you have a duty to provide any credible information that someone may have engaged in fraud or other criminal activity related to Title IV programs to the Office of Inspector General. So the OIG has, of course, the front office and then three major operational components. We have audit services that does great work and has an important role in the oversight of U.S. education programs and operations and funds. For instance, they do things like performance audits and financial audits. We work very closely with them, investigation services, and when appropriate, sometimes it makes sense for us to refer something more into the audits side of the house, and sometimes it makes sense for them to refer something over to us, and then sometimes it makes sense for us to collaborate and work together to make sure that we provide the taxpayer with the best outcome in a specific situation. And given this age that we are in with digital transformation that we're all going, it's kind of an amazing time, really. Of course, we have our information technology audits and computer crime investigations unit. They do things like audits of information technology systems, think like cybersecurity type of stuff. They also provide computer forensic support to us over at the Investigation Services. I remember when I first started doing this, it's getting to be a long time ago, we used to go and do a search warrant. We'd go 6 in the morning, ram down a door if appropriate, go into someone's residence and seize the family computer and process it. But these days when we do these types of events, we go in there and find it's amazing. You have just drawers full of iPhones and external hard drives that are many terabytes in size, and iPads and computers. So the ITACI provides us valuable support with digital evidence when we do our investigations. And they also have analytical component, the Technology and Analytics Service Division, which Nicole is a member of. And they do some proactive data analytics that is pretty impressive. There's times, in fact, just recently, without giving you too many specifics because it's ongoing, we had a school, actually, it was a conference that myself and Adam went to up in Oregon, and subsequent to that, a financial aid director contacted us with a handful of students that they thought maybe they saw a few fraud indicators, and we ended up, with the help of Nick Cole doing some data analytics, figured out that this is potentially a pretty large distance fraud matter that we're going to certainly pay closer attention to. So that's a small part of what Nicole does for us, and she'll be speaking in a little bit. So investigation services, again, if you can't read a slide, don't worry about it. I'll break down the fine points for you, I promise. So as I mentioned before, we at the Investigation Services have full statutory law enforcement authority. Most of us go through our initial training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. Like for instance, way back in the day when I did it, it was me, and it was mostly a class full of Deputy U.S. Marshals that went through the same training with them. We recently hired someone out in the Western region, and he recently completed his training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. His class was mixed in with Secret Service, for instance, in his class, going through the same core training. We have the full spectrum of law enforcement, traditional law enforcement tools at our disposal that you would expect any federal law enforcement agency to have. We're small, but we're mighty. We have everything from the capability to conduct surveillance, to have confidential informants, to monitor communications, to doing search warrants. We do quite a few residential areas to businesses. We do arrest warrants. We carry firearms, the full spectrum of law enforcement capability at our disposal. And again, our lane in the road where it kind of starts and stops is criminal activity associated with federal education funds, programs, and employees. And we're equal opportunity agency. So we'll investigate anybody, anywhere who messes with federal education funds. It doesn't matter if you're a political appointee. It doesn't matter if you're a career or civil employee at the Department of Education. It could be a school official, a former school official, of course, students, or people pretending to be students trying to access federal student aids at your institutions. We work closely with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and also, when appropriate, with the state attorney general offices and also local DAs. Law enforcement partners, we currently have, or in the past have had, joint investigations with every federal law enforcement agency you could probably conceive of, from all the ones that there's TV shows about to the ones that aren't. So, for of course, FBI, Postal Inspection Service, etc., Homeland Security, Secret Service. We also operate an OIG hotline, and that allows you guys, it's pretty easy to find if you just Google it. You can submit stuff electronically, you can call. You're also welcome to call us or me personally at the region. There's contact information on our website as well, as far as reaching out directly to the regions. And of course, we go around and provide outreach and fraud briefings like the one you're having today. And when appropriate, and it's a good thing that we do, when we identify systemic weaknesses in education programs, we do our best to provide input and play a role in helping to close those gaps of those systematic weaknesses. So I love this map, actually. It's a great map. It's the United States, in case no one can recognize it. Just kidding. So we have, this kind of lays the lay of the land for investigation services. We have 4 primary areas. We have the Western region there in green, which is where myself and Adam are. We have the blue region there, which is the Midwestern region. Yellow is the Southern region, and the gray area is the Eastern region. You see those red stars there. Those are where our actual physical offices are located at. So we have a headquarters element there in DC, and then 16 field offices across the country. To put it in perspective, I kind of like this slide because I put everything into context, a little bit of perspective. We have, don't hold me to the numbers, approximately 80 people currently with investigation services. And if you were to account and control for management and the critical roles that some people play at headquarters, we probably realistically have somewhere around 60, 65 actual agents on the ground working these cases. So if you were to do the math, 50 states and plus a few territories. For instance, out the Western region, we cover America, Samoa, Guam, Hawaii. We have Puerto Rico that's covered over from the Southern region. We have a little over 1 agent per area. It's a pretty daunting mission, but like again, I said, we're small, we're mighty, and we actually do a very, very good job with the resources that we do have. So we have, let's see here, we work long hours, we're hard workers, but we really are, every I've been at a few agencies now throughout my career, and at the end of the year or midway through the year when we look at the semi-annual report to Congress, I'm always very impressed with the type of investigative results that's coming out of this organization. So some differences between the OIG and FSA. So we complement each other. We have different roles. We work very hard and we do have a great relationship with FSA, both at the headquarters level and also at the regional level. Like, for instance, Adam and myself, we have a great relationship with the school participation division up in San Francisco in California. But we do have different roles. Federal Student Aid administers the program. They're the ones that actually administer the program. They're the ones, like, for instance, that will certify a school to participate in our program, recertify, if it were to come down to it, terminate a school from participating in our programs, do things like provide technical assistance and guidance, and make sure people are in compliance with the various regulations and laws and policies governing the administration of the Title IV program. And when appropriate, and when it comes across, just like you all, when they come across something that appears to be some criminal activity or fraud associated with their programs, they have a duty to report it over to the OIG. A lot of times stuff gets reported to us, and we do an assessment of it, and we realize it's a programmatic issue, and it's best handled by the important role, and they have a very important role Federal Student Aid has with protecting the integrity of the Title IV program. And then you have investigation services, which is where we're part of here. And I really look at us as, we're the hammer, is how I really look at us, because it's the amount of resources that it takes to actually do an investigation from start to finish and move it all the way through the criminal justice system is quite intensive. But when it's appropriate, we do open up our investigations and do our duty to hold those accountable in our criminal justice system that seek to enrich themselves by abusing our Title IV program. And as I stated before, we operate independently from the Department of Education. So, for instance, like an agency head or cannot tell the Inspector General to, hey, don't audit that one, or don't conduct an investigation in this area. We're an independent entity, and we have some statutory protections to go ahead and to initiate investigations when appropriate. So why are you all important to the OIG? Well, if you think back a few slides ago when you saw we really just have a few people doing a very, very large, challenging mission. And to put it in further perspective, Title IV is a very large, important program, no doubt, to us in the OIG, but it's actually one of 100 programs, over 100 programs that the Department of Education actually administers. And I look at you all, I come from a military background, really, as my boots on the ground. If you're working, for instance, at a Federal Student Aid office through, I believe there's, last I checked, in excess of 6,000 post-secondary institutions across the country. So I look at it, again, kind of similar to how I described our relationship with FSA. We complement each other and both have roles to play with protecting the integrity of the Title IV programs. So I look at you as being the boots on the ground, the front lines, my eyes and ears, or my intelligence coming into the OIG. And without you guys, I think it'd be impossible for us to really do right by the taxpayer. That's really what we're doing, is doing our best to safeguard these valuable funds to the students that need them. So, like, for instance, I love it when we go and do things like this, and later on someone contacts us from the front lines, like I recently mentioned in the beginning from Oregon, and it works where someone suspects, see some indicators, they call the OIG, and we take a further look at it and realize that there's something larger fraud scheme going on, and these people need to be held accountable in the criminal justice system, and we do so. And also, you guys have the ability at your end, of course, to resolve discrepancies at your end and safeguard the funds through those means as well. So a busy slide. Again, I'll break down the highlights there. So on your left side, you have a criminal statute, 20 U.S.C. 1097. And so Congress cared about safeguarding Title IV funds too, because they created this special statute for us. So this is a special statute here, and essentially what the statute says if anybody lies, cheats, or steals, or tries, you don't really have to get any money. If you attempt to get Title IV funds by lying, cheating, or stealing, you've essentially violated this criminal statute on the left. So criminal statutes, without getting too far into the weeds, we have the challenge of proving beyond a reasonable doubt in the criminal justice system. There's also usually an element of intent that's required to prove all the elements of a criminal statute. We're not limited with just a statute, but I'm sure this is one that you guys see a lot in our paperwork, and it's one that is charged frequently in our cases. But what I always tell people is when you've done something wrong and there's a federal investigation ongoing and we start collaborating closely as we do with the U.S. Attorney's Office, really the assistant United States attorneys have, I call it the menu of options. There's a number of statutes that they can use and options they have to charge somebody in any given case. Often we see for more than one person's involved, conspiracy, for instance, in fraud, mail fraud or wire fraud. Think about making those fast transmissions across state lines or sending those bank mobile cards in the mail, things along those lines, and of course, false statements. And then on the right side, we have a civil statute there. So it's a little bit different in that you don't have the same burden of having to necessarily meet the intent criteria that you see a lot on the criminal side, and the burden of proof is a little bit less. It's a preponderance of the evidence, so more likely than not, so it can be a little bit easier to prove. And there's some pretty serious, consequences potentially with civil. I mean, you've come across people that would frankly rather go to jail than have someone take all their money. Because that's really the tool of the civil system, is taking your money. And it's pretty powerful. You can be held treble damages. So for sake of simplicity, let's say you stole $1,000, well, you're going to have to pay back $3,000. And also there's some fines that go along with that too. So the civil tool is a very powerful tool, and when appropriate, that's something that we do as well. We spend a lot of time doing criminal investigations, but we also, when appropriate, do civil investigations as well. So why are Title IV institutions are targets? Well, I mean, simply put, you guys have the money. That is why you are targets for fraud. So last I looked, I want to say it was about $122 billion that was dispersed in across all federal student aid programs annually. That's about what goes out. So that's a lot of money out there, and that's not even accounting for $1 trillion plus loan portfolio that is out there. I think the last I heard it was, depends what source, I know it's north of 1 trillion. Sometimes I see 1.4, 1 point, I'm getting signals here, 1.6 now, so it's growing. So put that in further perspective, I mean, that's more than all consumer debt put together. So think about all that money floating around there on credit cards. Our loan portfolio is more than that combined. So there's just a lot of money. So where there's money, it's just the laws of probability. Well, we're here in Reno playing the odds here, but the laws of probability is there's going to be a certain degree of fraud associated with those funds. And here's the second thing that you guys have. You guys have information. So information, this is the age, I said again, digital transformation, it's the age of big data. You guys have some good data at your disposal. So that's why, the second reason why you're all targets of fraud as well. Okay, so what is fraud? So fraud is a deliberate distortion of the truth and attempt to attain something of value. So basically deliberately, and it's not an accident. You don't trip and fall and commit fraud. It's a deliberate distortion of the truth to get something of value, lying, cheating, or stealing. Donald Cressley invented the fraud triangle back, and it's basically 3 factors when they come together creates fraudulent behavior. You need opportunity. So again, I want to say there was 22 million FAFSAs submitted last year, and about 13 million actually were funded. So there's plenty of opportunity out there. Motivation, you'll see, here in Nevada, you might see debt. We see a lot of drugs. Sometimes we do search warrant, methamphetamine, et cetera, or just sheer greed, keeping up with the Joneses. And the last leg of the stool is rationalization. Everybody's doing it. I'm an internal employee. I'm getting underpaid, or what have you. This slide I'm gonna glance over. We talked about it. So you guys are targets because you got the money and you have the information. Types of potential fraudulent activity. This is just a list. I don't like to paint a box of this is all the types of fraud that could be associated with Title IV. So essentially, it's up to the imagination of the fraudster. Fraudster can dream up anything. And it's a deliberate distortion of the truth. Often we see false documents associated with it, and they're looking to gain money. Not always money, something of value, but often it's money. And here are some types of potential fraudulent activity. Examples of Title IV fraud schemes, of course, what you see if you work in a financial aid office is basically anything in a FAFSA. People lie, cheat, steal, they misrepresent, make material misrepresentations on the FAFSA in order to fraudulently obtain our funds. And last, I'd like to introduce my boss, Adam Shandling. He's going to talk about external, internal, and emerging threats. Thank you very much.
All right. Now you get to hear some of our good case examples. I'll break it down between external threats and internal threats. So I'll start with the external threats. Trammell Thomas. This is a fraud ring we just wrapped up, I think, last fiscal year. It was the first one that we had seen where it involved prisoners. So Trammell figured out in Colorado, on the Department of Corrections website, they list the prisoner's PII. It's a public record. He takes that information. He knows someone who works at a bank that has access to LexisNexis and makes the call and says, I've got all this information. All I'm missing is the first 5 digits of the SSN. Can you help me out? They get the information together, and he applies for almost 200 students to get aid. Now, he's targeting prisoners because they're not likely to check their credit reports while they're in prison. He targeted people, and it had the release date on the website that says this person's not getting out forever. 20 years, 30 years. So it's perfect. He has no one that's going to call and complain and alert the school. He had people he hired on the side to help apply, using distance education. And he was pretty successful, got about $500,000. And in this case, the reason he was caught, it was greed. He was driving in Tempe, Arizona in a fancy new car that he bought, and he had all the prepaid debit cards in a 1-gallon Ziploc bag. Right? So he's driving around with the indicia of his crime, and he's really proud of himself, and he gets pulled over, and we have the audio recording, we have the video recording from the police officer, and he went to trial, and it all was played at trial, and to watch the jurors watch this video of the officer, like, hey, what's that in the back seat? Nothing? I see a lot of debit cards. Nothing to see here. And trying to explain that away, and he was sentenced, I believe, to 5 years in prison this last fiscal year. If you would have told me 12, 13 years ago when I started this that we would get involved with terrorism investigations, I would have told you you're crazy. But believe it or not, it happened. So we worked a case in Southern California where somebody used their student aid to buy a plane ticket for their friend to fly to Turkey to cross over into Syria to fight against the United States with ISIS. I'm pretty sure that's not an educational expense. Correct me if I'm wrong. But, we don't always work a lot of the single benny, the smaller loss. It's very expensive for us to investigate a case and to get it prosecuted. However, in this case, $675 netted this defendant 30 years in prison and $1 million fine. And the reason we found out about it is he was bragging about it. So we get involved in these type of cases as well. It's not just the typical fraud ring or someone lying on their FAFSA. There's some serious stuff out there. This is one of my favorite cases. I have to brag really quick that when I started, this was my first case out of the academy. And I joke about it only because I'm a California State University graduate, and I took down a Rhodes Scholar. I'm very proud of that. Rachel Ewell, very, very bright individual with an amazing future ahead of her. But greed got to her, status got to her. So she was studying over at Oxford. She was getting aid, and that wasn't good enough for her. She reached the lifetime borrowing limit, and she was going to be cut off. Because she was so popular at Oxford, she was able to convince her professors to keep signing all this paperwork and give it to her to send in. She said, don't send it on your own. I'll take care of it. And she'd pencil whip stuff, fix stuff. Well, she got a notice that no more aid. So she got a second Social Security number. She convinced the Social Security Administration, using a small program called the HALE Act, to get a second Social Security number. And then ran up a whole new set of loans, public, Department of Education funded, as well as private, and almost $1 million. And her scheme unraveled because one person reviewed paperwork. Back when there was guarantee agencies, somebody at USAA, or USA Fund, sorry, thinking of insurance, and looked at the paperwork and said, wow, I got two different Social Security numbers, but they both student came from Alaska, and they've got the same middle name and the same first name? Well, what's the likelihood? OIG, I'm seeing something I don't like. Could you just take a peek at it? And it all unraveled at that point. And huge future. She was linked in with, no joke, with Mother Teresa. Their pictures are her working with Mother Teresa, helping the poor. That was what she wanted out there in the public persona, like everybody, like she's wonderful. And she took it. When we went to trial in Alaska, that's what she said. I'm this wonderful person. I would never do this. Guilty. 5 years in prison. Or almost 5 years in prison. It's an ongoing one that we've got over in Southern California. This is another one with, we just arrested, how many did we arrest? 3? 3 individuals, $1 million this time, using prisoners. Whereas Trammell Thomas in Colorado, the prisoners had no idea what was going on. This is one where they're willing participants. So the word is now spread like a wildfire. And I envision, there's some, secret fraud, dark web somewhere where people share tips on how to defraud the Department of Education. The word got out, and now there are people on the outside that are getting the information from inside the prisons, that there's someone on the inside that's passing it out. $1 million, like that. 235. And this is one, like I said, this is one where it's mostly willing participants. All right, internal. So your default rate is out of whack, right? Not good. So automotive school in Arizona decides they're going to hire Valdez to help them rehab some of the loans, maybe get them into forbearance, call all the borrowers, do those type of things. And he's going to be paid a performance bonus for doing those things. So he says, okay, well, I can do this. And within a couple of weeks, he contacted all the borrowers and got them all into forbearance. That's pretty impressive. He earned his bonus, right? Well, somewhere down the road, a borrower gets a letter in the mail about their loan being in forbearance, calls the school and says, I didn't do this. And the school says, yeah, you did. We have all the paperwork here. And then once they started to look at the paperwork, the school called us. We got involved, found out that he just pencil whipped them all. He never called anybody. He wanted his bonus. It was greed. And it was, I think he made maybe between $5,000 and $6,000 in bonuses for doing this, and ended up 4 years in prison. And in this case, we were talking about the fraud triangle that Chris discussed about fraud. It's weak oversight. It's the traditional, no internal controls, no oversight. My second case out of the academy. What happens if the top 4 people at a school are all corrupt? Normally, internal controls, there's checks and balances. The number 3 will see that the number 2 is not doing something, or the number 2 can check the number 1. Well, what if all 4 are in on it? That's not good. So you had the vice president of the school, you had the director of financial aid, you had the admissions director, and you had the business office manager. All in it. They all took smoke breaks together. They all played pool together. They all drank after work together, and I'm pretty sure they drank on the job as well. And so this is the school, Tacoma. School's going to close. It's the Christmas time. And these 4 decided, what if we get loans and then we'll apply for a loan discharge because the school closed? Nobody will know. Genius. And you know what? We should get our spouses involved and our family members. So what do? The school, it's over holiday break. The school is getting ready to close. The owner could not shore up financing. They figured they had about a month left to close out and do some sort of teach out, get the paperwork done, work with the department, and move on. So over the holiday break, the school is closed. They go in and they get about $66,000 worth of checks they write to themselves. And they do all the paperwork to make it look like they got their loans. Well, come back from holiday break. Owner says, I got money. We're not closing. Oh, no. What are we going to do now? Well, like a good fraudster, they go and they pencil whip all the paperwork. But when you're in a hurry to make it all look legit, you mess up. You forget to check the box. Maybe you put yourself in a class that wasn't even being taught at that school. Or your instructor's name, that person doesn't even teach there. That's what happened. So you had one honest employee way down the list, number 8 or 9 at the school. I think she's maybe the director of academics at this school, was helping the absentee owner balance some of their books and said, this is really weird. I see 30 checks in sequence made out to employees and their family members. There's no tuition at this school for employees. They get to go for free. They called us. We looked into it. We served a warrant at this school. We got all the paperwork, went to trial. 2 pled guilty, 2 were found guilty. And it's sheer greed, $66,000. They're felons. Oh, it's just greed. And I mean, it's ridiculous. They roped in their family members into this stuff. It was funny looking at the paperwork afterward. I mean, they really were in classes that weren't even being taught. That's what happens. And what can you do when the top 4 are all crooks, right? So it's really important that that honest person goes in there and says, this doesn't look right. I need to report this to the OIG, and I'll touch on reporting later. Don't just go, I don't want to deal with that, I don't whatever. It's really important that you report to us, and this is a prime example of why reporting is so important. And it doesn't mean there is fraud, doesn't mean you're getting anybody in trouble. What it means is something doesn't look right. All 30 checks, all in a row to people, to employees who shouldn't be getting aid, and their family members who don't go to the school, that doesn't look right. OIG, could you look into this for us? Trucking school, Tucson, Arizona. This is the CEO of the school. They were big on getting people to the lot of military people coming out of the military, get them into trucking schools. He was really good at recruiting, good gift of gab. And what the school came to find out is he was actually writing all the financial checks to himself. He had the ability, again, no segregation of duties, no internal controls. He was able to override financial aid. So financial aid thought they were doing all the right things, issuing the checks. Well, the checks, he somehow was able to, before the checks were issued, have them changed to his name. $900,000. And why we found out is a student called the school, financial aid, and said, I'm due, I think, $2,700. And the school said, we sent a check to you. He goes, I didn't get it. And so they looked at the check and, it was deposited and it was made out to the CEO. And then from there, they went to the school's law firm who hired a forensic auditor. $2,700 check turned into $900,000 worth of checks that he figured out how to circumvent the internal controls at the school. And he ended up, 1.2 million in restitution and 48 months in prison. So what are we seeing? We're seeing a lot of diploma mills. I don't know if what you're saying, I can only speak to what I'm seeing in my region. There was a huge diploma mill in Southern California. I can say now because they're closed, but Park Ridge. Private, I think they go Park Ridge Private School, private high school. They have a bunch of different names that they use. They had 3 degree programs. You could get a degree in a weekend. You could get one that got you from where you dropped out, maybe your sophomore year, get you up to your senior year. So it's kind of a bridge program. And then they had a traditional online high school program. Well, what we were seeing is that students were being directed there by their school. They'd come to the school, hey, no ATB test. Hey, I need a high school diploma, right? GED. I know where you can go. Matter of fact, the school would pay for it. So we were finding schools were sending their students to these diploma mills to get a diploma in a weekend. And I always joke, I'm like, had I known that you could get a diploma in a weekend, why would I spend 4 years in high school? I mean, but people believed they were getting real diplomas. And we had a couple of cases where schools, millions of dollars of aid were dispersed to students using what we would consider fraudulent diplomas. Here's the problem, though. In California, the California Department of Education does not regulate diplomas. In fact, it's in the ed code there that says, it is in statute that says we do not regulate private high schools. It is incumbent upon you, the student or the school to determine if it's valid or not. So we get a lot of calls in my office about, hey, I'm seeing these diplomas. I don't know if this is a real one. And in most states, the diplomas are regulated by the State Department of Education. Where we want to get involved is when they're being used to defraud the Department of Education. If they're being used to circumvent eligibility requirements, that's where we want to get involved. And we're seeing more and more, although I think with Park Ridge going out of business, it may dip down, but you know what? There's somebody waiting in the wings to pop back up and start another one. Third-party debt relief companies, I'm sure it comes as no surprise. People are getting random texts. I think we were joking last time. Didn't you get a call? I did. You got a call from one of these companies, of all the people, right? I get them. I get the emails. Hey, we like to talk to you about your student loans. I don't have student loans. But it's happening, and they're getting people. I mean, unfortunately, we can't protect people from themselves, and students are getting scammed. This reminds me a lot of the home foreclosure scams of 08, 09, 2010. The way those went away is information campaign, public information campaign, getting the word out. I know in some schools in Nevada, when they have a TV system that flashes, like if you're getting calls from, it looks just like this. If you're getting calls from debt relief companies, come see us. If it's too good to be true, it is too good, right? If somebody calls you and says that we can help you with your loans and you just pay us $50 a month, that's not okay. And what we've seen is in the areas where the schools are proactive in getting this information out there, that less and less students are being scammed from this. I mean, we're all in this together. And it's really important. I mean, we're working a lot of these debt consolidation companies, and they're like they're boiler rooms, right? They're like cockroaches. You put out a couple, and a couple pop up over here and over there. And the way you put them out of business is you don't give them business. And how you don't give them business is you put out the information out there that you come see us first. We'll not us, OIG, but the school. Tell your students, hey, come see us, ask us questions. We'll help you determine if this is legitimate. And we tell students, we get calls all the time from people who are scammed. And we say, there's a lot of free resources at the Department of Education. There's a lot of free resources at your school. You don't need to pay people to do this. And a lot of people will say, I didn't know that. So that's the disconnect. And that's where I would implore everybody to share that information. And then two-factor authentication. We had a case where a student clicked on a link on a phishing expedition, and it gave the hacker access to their bank information. And so they could a student deposit comes into their bank, and guess what? It goes right out the back to the crook. And so we're big on the two-factor authentication, right? We're something you know, something you have. Like when you log into your bank and you get that code on your phone that says, please enter this code. I mean, two-factor authentication is very, very, very important. If I can't drive home a point with this is, people are going to click on links, but if they click on the link and they get your information, if you have two-factor authentication, you're going to know when someone's trying to get your information. I think you're up, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Eisensoff, and I'm an investigative analyst. So unlike Adam and Chris here, who go out and do search warrants, go out and arrest people, I sit behind computer screens all day. I really look at documents and data, trying to pull together, see if there's trends, really trying to, almost like doing a puzzle. Where do the pieces fit together? What actually happened? And help these agents, see where they need to go next to be able to pursue their cases. So they've given you a good kind of overview of what's fraud, why is it important to be looking at fraud, and what threats exist out there for Title IV institutions. What I'm going to give you is some ideas that you can take back and think about what can we do at your schools to prevent and detect fraud. So this list right here of fraud risk indicators is a really good overview of things that might be warning signs, things you should look at to see if your institution is susceptible to those internal threats that we were just talking about. These all kind of relate to internal controls, and internal controls are the processes that ensure reliability, efficiency, and compliance when it comes to those laws, regulations, and policies we all have to adhere to. Now, I'm not going to go through this list, but a few that have stood out to participants who have been sitting right there where you're sitting in previous conferences is that one individual came across student files where they're missing documentation or it's inadequate. That's a risk that the school, and it's a weakness that the school had, and really she should ask more questions, look into it, and see if it's something related to processes. Is there something that the school can implement to mitigate that risk, or is it something that's related to something an employee is doing? If you have bad actors in the financial aid office, they might be driving that particular kind of finding that the school had. There was another individual who, she saw this list and she came right up to us after the conference, after we were done speaking. And she said, okay, I work at a very small school. We don't have enough people to have really good segregation of duties. There's one manager who's in control of everything. She's a trusted employee, but she really had access to the purchasing, the approvals, and the reconciliations. The one was like, I don't know what to do. Something just doesn't feel right. She called us. We went in and took a look. Turns out it's fraud. So please don't hesitate to, if you see anything going on here, if you don't have a good feeling about it, contact one of our agents. And I know you guys have audit findings or reviews out there. I know it can be daunting to go through some of the audit information. They're a really good kind of roadmap for areas you might be weak on and areas that you can improve on. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do with external factors. So detecting fraud before dispersing funds is the best way to combat this crime, because if your school has tightened things down, if you're asking for more verification documents, you're going to be less likely to be a target by those external threats that Adam was just discussing. And think about it this way, your institutions are all very different. You serve different types of schools, you have different students, you have different types of programs. You're all going to have different types of fraud that is really going to be, that you're going to be faced with. A distance education school is going to have different threats than a brick and mortar four-year school. So you have a wealth of information out there. You have databases and systems and online course platforms. look at what is available to you and what type of threats you might be susceptible to, and let that drive your conversation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through something that we get a lot of questions about, and it's identity theft or those fraud rings. When thinking about this type of kind of threat or fraud, these people are going to submit multiple applications to your college. There's going to be some commonalities that you might see. Some fraudsters are better at hiding their activity than others, but their ultimate goal is not to complete the program to get that certificate or to get that degree. Their goal is to participate enough that they can get those Title IV refund checks and walk out the door. So take a situation where we have a financial aid director who notices, or someone in the admissions office who notices, hey, 15 students have sent in applications from the same IP address. Don't hit the I found fraud button. Take a second and dig deeper. Ask more questions, because it might be fraud. It might be something that's innocuous and they're submitting applications from a library. Gather more data. So look at, are they applying to the same programs? Are they going to enroll in the same courses? Are there, if you're stopping that and asking for more verification, what are they submitting? Are they submitting information from diploma mills? Are they submitting something that looks forged? If they're selected for identity verification, is it all coming from a notary that, it's the same notary that just stamped all 15 when they do that identity verification? We've also seen instances where they're submitting those verification documents, but they're trying to mask their activity. So they're sending them in from what are called disposable email addresses. It's like disposable.com, mailinator.com, really trying to appear that they don't have anything to do with each other, but they really do, because they're really different than your regular students. The fun ones that have actually come up to, I had someone come up to the table where some of your schools do the recordings. They'll capture conversations with students that are calling in to check on their application, to check on their disbursements. You all may notice something fishy. These students want to aggressively call in and check on everything. So I might call in, checking on an application or disbursements for Nicole. 5 minutes later, I might try to call in and disguise my voice and try to pass off for Aaron Jordan. That's a huge red flag. Get us involved immediately. But say you don't have enough, or you haven't found enough that you wanted to stop the fraud there. It's okay, you can keep monitoring these people. You might see how they interact with their class activity. You guys have online course platforms, and there's also those IP logs or the audit logs that your IT staff can help you with. You might see, or the professors might see, that coursework is being submitted from the same IP address. The students also might be sophisticated and trying to hide that by trying to have them all submit coursework from the same virtual private network that would be obscuring their true IP address. These are just clues. You keep adding them together, you keep putting those pieces of the puzzle together. It paints a different picture than your normal students who are there for their own education to get that certificate, to get that degree. The last area where you want to be concerned, and also getting your third party, if you have a third party servicer or a third party that does the disbursements or those debit cards, the bank that does debit cards, get them involved in this conversation. Remind them that it's their job to also prevent, detect, and report fraud. What we've found is some of these third parties are really good at finding out that there's multiple students and the funds are all going to the same bank account. You also might have the debit cards and refund checks that are being sent to the same, maybe not the same address, maybe just the same street. The one involving the student's debit card address being changed just prior to disbursement, that relates back to what Adam just said with the Title IV redirect, where the bad guys know all about Title IV. They know your schedule of when you're sending out the refund checks. They will go in right before, take over a student's email, the school email account. They'll reset the password, go in, go to the debit card information, redirect that redirect the address for that, and do that just a day before the money actually drops. The fraudsters are really kind of sophisticated in knowing our systems. So things to take back with you. When you get back, I know there was a lot of content here, a lot of content in all the other presentations you've gone to. Download those slides, and especially ours, and really use them to conduct or even refresh your fraud risk assessment or your fraud plan. It's a best practice to involve people from different offices, involve your IT, involve the admissions folks in the conversation of how can we detect and prevent fraud. Share information with your other schools. You guys are the ones that are finding all this. You guys found the legal guardianship issue. You guys found the Title IV redirect scheme. You've reported to us, and we've kind of blasted that information out for everyone else. But you guys talking to each other is the best way to realize there is a problem. So evaluate your strengths and weaknesses, find out what your institution is most at risk for, and try to mitigate those risks. Also, with your fraud plan, try to figure out how you're going to evaluate potential fraud, and then also document how do I report to the OIG, because sometimes that step is kind of missing, and that's where Adam is going to take back over and tell you exactly how to report to us.
I'm going to do it.
Oh, Aaron's doing it.
Sorry. Thank you, Nicole. So how do we move forward? I think if I had one key takeaway for you, I'm always taught you should have these 3 key takeaways, but I have one. You're a valuable partner. You think about the guardianship issue. That started with you. That started with schools who reached out to one of our agents to have a conversation. And it's now blossomed into something much bigger, not only for the OIG, but for FSA to take a closer look. So you are a valuable partner. While we are fraud experts, we are not program experts. So we rely heavily on conversations with you, interactions with you, and your expertise to see things that we would not see immediately. FSA is a valuable partner. I see my friend here, Ingrid Valentine. Sometimes I think she thinks she's my boss. But we work very closely because there is an exchange of ideas that where we can go pursue people on criminal and civil issues, we know oftentimes they may not rise to that level. So it's important for us to early on involve FSA, program compliance, because maybe there are things, gaps we are not seeing that would be better served with program compliance reviews, at least raise awareness. We talked about many things related to identification, and this is consistent, I think, with what you heard on Tuesday in the opening session. You heard from the coup, who said, you're a partner. He talked about changes in programs and training for you, as well as students. That's important, right? Your training will help improve not only your performance, but it helps us, right? That training not only protects education funds, but it protects your brand. Every year I say, it's as important to you to catch bad things that are happening at your school. And unfortunately, sometimes those things are happening with people internal to the school, and that's rare. But you are a target externally for sure. You have a lot of money. We talked about information you have that is extremely, extremely valuable. I'd rather steal someone's PII than their bank accounts, because with the PII, I can get probably more money out of it. So it's a very, very important thing. Question documents, ask, get involved early, and call us early. I'm not going to go over this. Why should you report? I talked about that. You have an obligation to do that. If I leave one other thing, it's to protect your brand. If you don't protect your brand, bad things are going to happen. And in DC, we always talk about you don't want to end up on the front page of the Washington Post. Is the biggest thing we worry about. And I would just, if you can identify with that, you would understand what the impact could be to your school, right? It protects the programs, it protects you. We've gotten a lot of questions on when you should provide information to us, and you're not fraud experts. We would ask you to just contact us early. But there's been a lot of questions over the last couple of years about how do you report. You can go to do a web search, Google search, and you can find that we operate an OIG hotline, and it's pretty self-explanatory, it walks you through, but you're able to submit your information there. Nicole talked about the kinds of things you should be gathering, the kind of things you should be looking for, and all of that can be sent through our portal, and then we will follow up. As Chris talked earlier, we are not a very large organization, but we do pretty good work, and not everything, and just so I can set expectations, not everything that we receive can we work. Some things we will send back to the school, and we had conversations earlier with some of you all about professional judgment, and I know there was a session on that. That's really huge for you. There are other things that we can't pursue that we send over to FSA because we know they're better suited. But where we can pursue criminal cases, we do. But our hotline is a really easy way to provide that information to us, and hopefully we follow up. With that in mind, I want to open it up to questions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm James with Dallas County Community College. We've worked in the southern region in the Dallas office with several different agents over fraud rings and those kind of things. And I kind of have a question because we will report up, let's say, a set of students, usually between 50 to 150 students, the same IP addresses, completely different home addresses, in states such as Mississippi, Alabama, Nevada, Arizona, I mean, everything. But they all have the same IP address. And we don't really get any feedback back from the department. And what we're concerned with is we only typically, from that group of students, only have maybe 5 students who show up who are ready to, start classes and all those kind of things. And because we have a heightened sense of those students, we put them through a, rigmarole of documentation, things such as identity, statement of identity, high school completion, anything we can think of to delay that process until we can get something back from OIG or somebody telling us, hey, this is legitimate, this is not fraud, this is fraud. We're not getting any feedback. And the problem is that if I put that student through all of this, and it looks like they are qualified, I have to give them Title IV aid. But I don't want to be a party to their fraud. So what do we do? And then I have a question about diploma mills, because in Texas, Florida, and several other places, we're the wild, wild west on what is a high school and not a high school. Anyway, but that was my question. What do we do? How do we get feedback to say, yeah, it's okay to give this money to this student?
Thank you. That's a common question we get, and let me add some context to that. So one of the things, if we don't get back to you, I would urge you to pick up the phone. There's an ATOM in every region, special agent in charge, that you can say, I've made this referral to you. Can you tell me where we are on it? We may not be able to give you specifics, but we can say whether it's something we're taking a look at. We get about 4,000 complaints a year. And so we're not CSI, we're not one of the TV shows, so it does take us some time to do some of the data analytics to validate what we're looking at, to then make some decisions on whether it's something we can pursue. I would tell you in that instance, in many instances where I hear some of these things where you have suspicions, and Ingrid can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think therein lies some professional judgment on, hey, this doesn't seem right. I'm going to hold this in abeyance until I can hear back from the OIG. but as best we can, we try to get to you, to those cases, because we have so many referrals. And I got to tell you, we have more fraud rings than we can even work. But we try to get back to the schools to say and hopefully collaborate with you on this is something we're going to look at. We would ask maybe for your assistance. We would ask for a certain documentation. But it is not always an efficient process because of so many things that we have coming through.
I understand that. My thing is I don't want to give them aid, because I can tell you the students, because we have 80-something people that work in financial aid, because we have 100,000 students. So we have a lot. I mean, we are a target. Good, distance education, all that. We're a target. We know we are. So we look for it. And I could tell you, and I could provide documentation. Susan Schmidt was our special agent.
Sure.
And I would provide documentation to her, and she was good with getting back with us. But I could tell you there was a woman who had this address as her mom's address, had a driver's license that said Nevada. The documentation was certified from somebody in Arizona. She was going to school in Alaska, and for some reason, she gave me another address in Massachusetts. So I'm like, this person to me is not a legitimate student. And they had their brother, their sister, their mother, and their aunts and uncles all applying to me at the same time. I could tell you that's a fraud ring. I can't tell you that's a fraud ring. I can say that's a fraud ring. I can also tell you that these people, even though I'm a really smart person, some of them are smarter than me. Some of them have figured out how to commit a crime, and if they spent all their time, figuring out how to earn the money legitimately, that'd even be better. But that's a different issue. The other thing I had about because when we suspect, and this is a diploma mill, when we suspect that there is a diploma mill, we are not awarding them aid. So from the local DA and even from the AG in Texas, they don't consider that a crime. They consider it a fraud on the student because they paid $200. But it's not it doesn't rise up to federal crime because, of course, there was no aid, no Title IV given to that student. I don't know how to stop them because they are marketing to the student, pay $200 so that you can get Title IV aid. I'm not sending them to these places. They're being marketed that way. So what do we do?
Yeah, that's consumer education, and you're not going to stop that. I think Chris maybe talked about it earlier, educating your students. But that's a tough one that it's not going to go away. And education is probably an awareness campaign is probably the best way to pursue something like that. Of course, we got more questions, right? Okay. We got one? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm Delisha Lucky from Emory University in Atlanta. You had touched on briefly about and I hear this on the radio all the time, the advertising for Come Consolidate or loan forgiveness. And I don't know if that's under the OIG, but how can we stop that? Because I know I have friends who know I work in financial aid, and they're like, well, I'm going to do this because they said on the radio, and I'm like, that is not true. Like, don't argue with me. You can't do that, So I try to educate them on, loan forgiveness and stuff, but we can't stop people from advertising to get our students to do that. We can't stop that process because, I'm not saying everybody is fraudulent, but they're not advertising correct information. And so they get them to call, because I called the number once to see what they were going to tell me, and then I hung up, and then they called me back. So I was just like, we can't do anything about that?
Yeah, so FTC, which Federal Trade Commission, really does have a campaign, and as Adam said, is when you do away with one, many others will pop up. If she's your friend, I think you have the liberty to sort of slap her back and forth. If maybe that will help. to wake her up to what's happening. But the Federal Trade Commission really is engaging in an awareness campaign on many fronts. I mean, most of us, if not all of us, get the spam calls. I know there's an effort there. That's probably your best source, but you won't stop it. One thing about criminals is as one scheme is cut off, others emerge. And Adam said it, or Chris said it, fraudsters are limited by their imagination.
I just have a thought. In one of the suggestions, it's looking at references on the MPNs. And right now it's difficult to compare data unless you already have a student set and you're opening up each MPN. And maybe down the line there can be a better way that you can work together to get that out of the system, you know, like reportable information where we could just capture it more easily. I know that's not really your area, but maybe it's an idea that can be brought to the table.
And Nicole, anything on that? Yeah, it's.
The FSA enabling that.
Yeah, yeah. Can we circle back on that at the end? I mean, that really is not would fall
Right,
under us.
but
Yeah.
just-
Is that SSA? FSA, yeah.
Sorry.
We'd have to deal with that.
But
FSA.
something that, you know,
Yeah.
we could work on together to show its importance, you know?
Sure.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm from Pikes Peak Community College. I was just wondering, in addition to the regions that y'all work, do you also subdivide by like school, like 2 years in community colleges or private or public or anything? Because I feel like there's a more unique set of fraud possibilities specifically with community colleges because we have open enrollment and you can just apply to the school online, and then there's no documentation the way that there is in a traditional four-year institution. So I didn't know if there's any special attention within your office devoted to those more vulnerable populations.
Yeah, we don't subdivide, but that is an interest to us. So I would ask that you contact us and let's talk. I mean, we talked to another community college earlier that told us about a pretty unique thing we hadn't seen that we believe is probably unique to community colleges. And so part of that is educating us. And then one of the things we're great at is trying to take a subset of what we see in one part of the country or one, in your instance, a community college, and apply it across the country to see where else it may be happening. And then where we can pursue criminal cases, or in some cases we check with FSA to see what sort of awareness they have of the issue and how we might tackle that issue together. Is it a fraud issue? Is it a program issue that would be better served? Or with some of our audit counterparts here, whether it's something that can be addressed through one of OIG audit programs.
Thank you.
Good morning. I have a question specifically related to Parkridge diplomas for Adam. So occasionally we have Parkridge diplomas come across our desk. We're a school in Southern California. And back in 2016, a large school chain was closed because of their affiliation with Parkridge, and the guidance we received was so long as the student didn't obtain their high school diploma through the affiliate, so they physically went to Parkridge, and we would confirm with Parkridge whether or not they received their diploma through the affiliate or with Parkridge themselves, the high school diploma was valid. So now that Parkridge is closed and we see any Parkridge diplomas come through, would you say that they are not a valid high school diploma?
I can't make that call.
Okay.
I mean, we can't make that call.
I
'cause,
think we'll
unfortunately,
just
they had
stay
three
away from it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. But usually under questioning, if the student is saying, oh, this is my high school diploma, you can ask just a couple of questions and it probably falls apart. We're being told to stop, by the way. So, I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you offline after this, or we'll be in the resource center. So if anybody else has questions, come see us in the resource center. I'd be happy to follow up with you on that one. So,
Thank you.
thank you very much.